Hey everyone, welcome back to Life Without Secrets. Today I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Cher Anderton, a mental health therapist, author, speaker, and coach who empowers individuals to navigate life's discomforts with more calm and confidence. Cher's journey from being a highly anxious, reactive person to actively seeking out discomfort as a source of growth is nothing short of inspiring. In this episode, we're going to dive into how discomfort, often seen as an obstacle, can actually be a powerful catalyst for personal and professional development. Cher is going to share her practical tools from her Own It framework, helping you to not only recognize discomfort as a natural part of growth, but to embrace it as a superpower. Whether you're facing challenges in your relationships, your career, or personal growth, this conversation will equip you with these strategies to approach discomfort with resilience and transform it into an opportunity for greater joy, connection, and success. So get ready to learn how to own your discomfort before it owns you. Cher, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I'm so excited to be here.
Right? I know I saw that line on your website, like own your discomfort before it owns you. And I was like, ooh, I really like that.
Yeah, I think we give way too much power to discomfort for sure.
I
And
know. I know I did, and it held me back for years in all areas of my life. And I would love to know about your journey. Like how can you start by maybe sharing a bit about your personal transformation and what led you to start really embracing discomfort as a tool for growth?
yeah. So I, like most humans, really try to avoid discomfort
Mhm.
because I felt like I experienced enough of it just with things that had happened to me
Mhm.
already growing up. So, somewhat of a tough childhood in various ways. And so if I had to choose, I would move away from
Yeah.
discomfort as much as possible. And that really kind of started to shift a little bit in my early 20s. I picked up marathon running as my parents were getting divorced. That was my therapy at the time. I had little kids, and the running was just that getaway therapy kind of thing, and ended up connecting with people who were big time runners
Mhm.
and did, ultra marathons and that
Wow.
sort of thing. So ended up kind of going down that path. And that was about the first time choosing to run a marathon that I actually leaned into discomfort. And so
Mhm.
it's just kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily small scale, it was a pretty big deal to run a marathon. But it built some confidence for me. I just needed that like boost of like, oh, I can do really hard things that I
Mhm.
choose,
Yeah.
and it feels so much more empowering when I actually choose it versus just being this like passive kind of participant in life, just
Mhm.
letting things happen to me. And then fast forward a little bit, my husband and I, we have three biological children, and then we have an adopted, one of our kids is adopted from foster care. He was almost 8 years old when we did that, when we adopted him. And it was tricky. He had a big story,
Mhm.
added a lot of energy and just needs to the family and in a needed way, but it
Mhm.
was difficult. It was really difficult. And what I really noticed is that my regular parenting tactics, which I had worked pretty hard at regulating my nervous system a bit more with our biological children and that sort of thing. Um, but even just like a firm mom voice with him was very activating.
Mm.
And I just made the choice like, I've got to do something differently. I am not going to allow this kiddo to feel unsafe in this house.
Yeah.
Um, he needs a space to heal
Yeah.
and grow. And so, really, what happened is that we shifted practices to really meet his highest needs. And then the trickle down effect of that was really lovely. We all benefited from essentially trauma informed practices, more trauma informed practices in the home.
Mhm.
Um, and I just really saw the power of leveling up our skills to navigate these hard things, social emotional, building our social emotional intelligence, just having really practical tools and strategies, that sort of thing, that just made life so much easier. So instead
Yeah.
of expecting life to get easier for us outside of ourselves, we were working on that kind of internal landscape and skill set so that we could move through life easier no matter what was happening in our external worlds. And so it was really the parenting journey that
Mhm.
shifted things for us, and particularly parenting a kiddo who had experienced childhood trauma
Mhm.
that really changed. And it's just been such a gift to our
Yeah.
entire family.
I love that you did that proactively too. Like you noticed it and you were like, "You know what? This isn't working," and not we I don't know exactly what he's been through, right? And some of the things he may not even remember, right? But there is something here that isn't working. How can I fix it, right? Instead of just trying the same thing over and over again, getting the same results, and then everybody not growing, everybody being miserable. And I see that a lot,
Yeah.
actually. Like we repeat the same patterns until we choose to be aware of it. And I know, like, obviously in your own story with your family, but also in what you do for work, you focus a lot on the trauma or on what we've been through in our past and how it impacts our lives. So, how do you believe trauma influences our relationship with discomfort? And how can we start shifting from avoiding it or repeating the same patterns to embracing it?
Yeah, and I think whether you've experienced trauma, stress, anything, I
Mhm.
think most of us, just given the way that we're socialized, the way that we're raised, most of us show up in adulthood without the skill set we need to actually navigate it really well.
Yeah, that was definitely me
So,
too.
yeah, our parents did the best they could. They're not the villains in our stories. And
Yep.
most of us still show up without what we need to be happy and like healthy and well adults, emotionally, relationally, mentally, all of that.
Mhm.
And then you add on that global experience of a pandemic, and I think most of us are a bit kind of bereft. And what I how I view discomfort, and one of the ways that it really positively impacts our life is that it's an invitation to
Mhm.
level up. If we're not
Yeah.
uncomfortable, we don't often do the thing. And so it's that discomfort of like seeing the look in this kiddo's eyes. If I was just like, hey, no, with a firm voice, and it was so activating for him, um, that was uncomfortable. And I could have just sat with the guilt and shame of that, of like, oh, I'm a terrible parent or whatever. Instead, I really look towards solutions. Like, what do I need to do this better? There has to be a way. And we have so many resources available to us these days. And so it's really lovely to lean into it. Around the trauma piece, that's one form of discomfort that some of us experience. And I think,
Mhm.
to my point earlier around, having things happen to you, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the skills to navigate it well.
Yeah.
So just because someone experiences trauma in some form, or a version of toxic stress, emotional neglect, whatever it is, doesn't necessarily give us those skills we need to navigate it. So we do actually train ourselves, and that's part of my framework, is that we train ourselves to navigate discomfort better by choosing it. I also think it's very empowering to do that. So instead of like, oh, I've had enough bad things happen to me, I'm just going to avoid discomfort as much as possible.
Mhm.
It's more like I'm going to take my power back, and I'm going to choose discomfort. I'm going to consent to it.
Yeah.
And that is a completely different experience for us. Um, and really, like I said, very empowering
Yeah.
to just grab that power back.
Yeah. I mean, even in my own life, a lot of people on here that's been listening a while know my story, but I remember becoming an ER nurse and thinking like, wow, I'm such a superhero. Like I can see anything and go right to the next room and nothing phase me. I can go home. I'm fine. Because I had avoided emotions. Like I didn't know a word to describe it. Like I knew like surface level things to say, but and I really felt like I was fine. But it's interesting that it actually would come out in other areas of my life. Like maybe I wasn't addressing it there and I was fine at work, right? Like I put on this uniform and I could do the job well and like I felt great there. But there was other areas in my life that it would show up in. And so it's interesting how, like, things that happened in our past can affect how we deal with things in our present and then affect all these other areas of our life. And sometimes I know for me, for instance, I didn't actually connect the dots until much later of how one affected the other.
Yeah. I call it, it comes out sideways. If we don't process what we need to process, it comes out sideways. But
Mhm.
again, none of us were really taught these skills. We know how to tie our shoes, we know how to ride a
Mhm.
bike or drive a car. Or
Mhm.
I always say, like, do long division. How's that working for us?
Yeah.
To know that versus never being taught the steps to process emotions in healthy ways, even identifying them as adults with
Yes.
very limited vocabulary,
Yep.
naming it. So one of the first things I usually encourage clients to do is uh, print out a feelings chart.
Yeah, same.
Get
Mhm.
familiar with, build your
Yes.
vocabulary, because those feelings are just information from the brain. And if
Mhm.
you keep dismissing the information, it's going to keep coming up in more and more uncomfortable ways till you pick up what it's putting down. So it's really important that we actually have a solid vocabulary and just identifying.
Yeah. When I first started going to therapy, I would actually bring 100 list of emotions that I printed out from my Google. Like, I would just print it out and I would take it with me because I'd have no idea what they were talking about. And I'm like, "Well, I think I feel," and I would, like, have to go through the list of words, like, "This one right here. Yeah, that's how I feel," you know?
Yeah.
Until I, like, got into, like, knowing, like, "Oh, okay, like, yeah, that's how I feel." Yeah. Feels like confirmation, to have a word to it.
Yeah. And when
So
we even just identify it, it can be
mhm,
enough for the brain to start regulating more. And like,
mhm.
oh, sees that she's anxious. She's picking up what I'm putting down. So I can let go and stop sending those
Yes.
like hormonal and chemical signals, that it doesn't have to keep intensifying. So the goal is really to roll it back as far as we can, like catch it as quickly as we can before we get so uncomfortable. That's the interesting thing about building the skill set, is that it actually becomes so much easier to navigate
Mhm.
discomfort because, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
Been here before. I know what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, so good. Well, so you've developed the Own It framework to help people really navigate through discomfort. So can you walk us through kind of what this framework entails and how it helps really people turn their discomfort into more of a power?
Yes. So my tagline is own discomfort so it doesn't own you. I do think we give so much power away to discomfort. And I really want to kind of, it might seem a little aggressive, but I just want it to kind of stick in people's minds.
Mhm.
um, and get the hang of it and see how empowering it can feel to just take on discomfort and build the skills to navigate it, instead of avoiding it. We all, the first piece of it is observing. So we all have our own story around discomfort. If you ask someone, how they navigate discomfort, they'll say, I avoid it, I ignore it, I try
I
and get as
rehash it.
as possible. I can't
Mhm.
let it go. I talk about
Mhm.
it all the time. I sit in the soup of it. We all have these narratives around it, and those stories really come from how we were modeled and taught to navigate it. So that wiring gets instilled at a very young age. So as adults, we really want to be consistently evaluating, observing what's happening in our brains and bodies. What is the story that I'm telling myself? Is that
Mhm.
really in alignment
Mhm.
with the direction that I want to go? And then the W in own is wield it. So that's the superpower piece. We don't have the power to choose necessarily the thoughts and feelings that always show up in our brains and bodies, but we do have the superpower to decide whether they're going to stay,
Mm.
whether we're going to replace them or not. And so it's a pretty simple skill, actually, to notice what I'm thinking and feeling, what I'm even saying and doing sometimes. It's kind of a cognitive behavioral thought triangle concept, and then shift it. And the wield part of that superpower, the shifting, it's not toxic positivity. It's not like I'm going to say, oh, everything is awesome. This
Mhm.
is so easy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna validate it and say this is really hard, and I can ask for help. I can figure it out. I've done hard things before, and just even saying something different in my mind or sometimes out loud, because I like to talk to myself out loud too.
Mhm.
In a minute or two, you can shift your entire felt experience, and then it's most likely going to shift what you say and do. And so we want to observe what's happening in our brains and bodies. What do we feel a lot of the time? What are we thinking a lot of the time? I'll even ask clients, what's your percentage of helpful to unhelpful self-talk? And most, I see female identifying clients only, adolescents and older. And most will say 80-20, 80% negative,
Mm.
20% positive. We want to flip that.
Mhm.
We absolutely want to flip that. And we have the power to do that, but not until we're aware that that's actually what our percentage is,
Yeah.
right? So we observe it, what's happening in our brains and our bodies. We wield that kind of superpower. And then the name piece is the N is naming it. What's the direction we want to go? What is our goal? Where do we want to head with this? How do you want to feel more often? How do you want to think more often? What are some of the things you want to achieve? What do you want to see show up in your relationships? Getting really clear on what the goal is, because if we don't give our brains new instructions, hey, we're going in this direction instead, we're just going to keep kind of floundering around. The
Mhm.
tools and strategies aren't going to be as helpful. So we want to say, hey, no, brain, we're going in this direction. Here's why. Get a lot of buy-in, get the brain on board, and then we start making teeny tiny shifts. That's the I and it. It's implement it.
Mm.
Teeny tiny shifts. We're not going to go all crazy with it. It's like when you think of people in the new year and they're like, all of a sudden, I'm going to go from the couch to running a 5K in a month, or I'm
Mhm.
going to go to the gym 5 days a week. Your brain's like, this is super cool. I love that, because the brain loves novelty.
Mm.
So initially, that big goal is like, oh, that's a little exciting. And it gets on board for like 2 weeks. You can time it almost. It's like
Yep.
10 to 14 days, and your brain's like, hey, forget this. I
Mhm.
want to go back to that. I want to go back
Yeah.
to the couch.
I wanna go back to my comfort zone.
It was too much. It was too much. Your brain does not like huge change. So we want to do teeny tiny shifts. So when I know that I have a goal, if I'm creating a new goal for myself, I'm going to go, okay, what's the lowest burden? Start. Oh, like once or twice a week for 10 minutes? Great. I'm going to do that.
Mhm.
Super achievable. And then you just keep building on that. And before you know it, you're doing the thing, and the brain's not putting up a bunch of blocks to it. The big
Mhm.
change is the brain goes, no way, after a while. And that's why the gyms are empty, halfway through January or by February 1st,
Mhm.
because people are working against neuroscience. They're working against how their brain actually likes to make changes. So we want to get that brain on board by making those teeny tiny shifts.
So using workout for an example, like if somebody wanted to start working out again, let's say they hadn't really been working out in a few months at least, they are like, "You know what? I don't even feel good. Like I'm really like getting down on my negative self-talk. I'm not eating healthy. I'm not working out, and like I really want to shift this because I know it's not good for me. I know I'll feel better when I make these changes."
Yeah.
What would a plan look like that would be our brain would appreciate as well?
Mhm. Different for different nervous systems, for sure, because we
Okay.
each kind of our own window of tolerance. So a piece of it is having some of these other steps in place, like knowing yourself well enough, having some self awareness around like what would actually be possible. How long has it been since I've worked out? How consistent was I before? And what seems just kind of like the easiest 0 point entry? Kind of think of the pool, right? With the
Mhm.
just walking gently in. What would be the easiest way to just go, okay, I'm doing something. I'm starting to get those feel good chemicals that I want more of in my brain and my body because I'm making different choices. I will say exercise is like the number one
Mhm.
evidence-based intervention for managing anxiety, depression, all the things. So
Yeah.
some type of movement should be a huge part of just our overall well-being, whatever that looks like, sounds like for your abilities, your desires, that sort of thing. So it could just be once or twice a week for 10 minutes. We can give
Mhm.
10 minutes to
Yeah.
something. Or if you want to do something every day, you're like, okay, for 5 minutes. I'm going to
Mhm.
start something. It's just really easy. You're not going to like kill your body. So you're so sore you can hardly move, because then that triggers and activates things in the brain too, like the pain signals. It's just like gently. I
Mhm.
think we tend to lean in too hard and like with a hustle mentality often
Mhm.
with goals. Oh, we need to go, really hard at this, these 70-day detox crazy thing. It's just, no, your brain and body doesn't need or want that necessarily.
Hmm.
And so we want to be super gentle and soft, actually, versus really hard on ourselves and like, oh, get your lazy butt out of bed. Just like, it feels so good to move
Right?
my.
That just is more negative self-talk.
It's just more negative self-talk. It's that kind of, soldier voice that's just like, get up and do the things. And I just think we could all use a lot more softness. So what a lovely question to ask is like, I wonder what my body, how it wants to move today.
Mm-hmm.
Let me sit with that for a minute. Oh, Pilates feels really good. 10 minutes? That sounds good. Let's see how it goes. And it's not that you're just going so easy on yourself. You're stretching little by little. You're pushing at the edges of your comfort zone. But it's so gentle and kind. That's also really lovely. And shifts a lot of our wiring that most humans need to shift. We're very unkind to ourselves.
Yeah. Something that has been useful for me too is just creating more space in my schedule for like
Mm.
a little bit of nothing,
Yeah.
right? Because I tend to overdo.
Mhm.
And so for me, like planning my schedule so that I have a gap between things on my nervous system has been super rewarding for me and given me a lot more energy for like whatever the task is next. Like just taking like a full on break from everything, not picking up my phone,
That
just
part,
like,
yes.
yeah, like just having a real break, even if it's like, I mean, sometimes I'll go outside and like water my flowers or something, but
Yeah.
like that feels good to me. So like I'm okay with doing that, but just really giving myself a break and being okay with it.
Yeah, it doesn't help if the whole time you're taking that break, you're berating yourself for not being productive.
Exactly.
It's really unhelpful, and it's actually probably going to add more to your stress because you
Mhm.
keep escalating thinking of all the things you have to do.
Mhm.
We want to look at those ways that you're infusing your day. We want to look at those things as just ways to make our lives more sustainable and well.
Yeah.
We can't push at these edges that hard for that long without having it show up in really uncomfortable ways, often with physical illness,
Mhm.
relational distress, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it's so important. It's a huge piece of. I wrote a book called Could It Be Better?
I
And
was just gonna ask you about that. Yeah.
it's about just all of these kind of tools and strategies, these things I've paid attention to that we don't often know what we're bringing to relationships. We just
Mhm.
don't have this self-awareness and self-management to know that. So I 2/3 of the book is about your stuff, getting to know you and building your individual skill set. And then really the final third is just on tools and strategies and relationships. But we need to have those foundational skills in
Yeah.
order to be well. So it's really
Well,
important to be paying attention to that.
before I dive too far into that, I wanna
Mhm.
go back to the acronym really quick
Yeah.
because I kinda interrupted you. So, we have, observe it, wheel it, name
Yeah.
it, and then we have I is
Implement it. But
implement.
yeah, observe it, wield it, like wield a sword, wield your superpower, that kind of thing. Name
Mhm.
it, implement it, and then the T is train it. So that's
Train
the
it.
piece, yeah, that I spoke to earlier around empower yourself by choosing some discomfort. Now, again, we're not gonna choose the top rung of the ladder. I'm gonna do 5 days a week. We're gonna do bottom rung of the ladder, first rung of the
Mhm.
ladder, 1 or 2 days. I'm just gonna remind my brain and body what it feels like to exercise again and get those good endorphins going. Okay, great. So, but we do want to choose and push at our edges, but potentially pushing at our edges is just working out once or twice a week, to use that metaphor. Again,
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways to do it. Um, if you want to add more self care, if you want to practice setting boundaries, start with a low rung. Do not go wild and start setting all these boundaries with people. I see that often where the pendulum can swing. It's like, wait, I have this ability to set boundaries, and they just start setting boundaries everywhere. And it's like, hold on a second.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's going to start kind of dismantling things a little bit too quickly. So you just want to like, okay, what's the first rung on this ladder of training myself to whatever discomfort you're choosing for yourself, whatever you name for yourself? You want to
Yeah.
train yourself. with discomfort that you choose where you feel confident, you build your, capacity and competence with it. And then you're like, okay, what's the next rung? What's the next level of this? And what skills do I need to bring on board in order to do that? Maybe
And
it's not that hard. Yeah, go ahead.
are these questions we should be asking ourselves once a week, every day? Like as we're like going up this ladder and like trying out these, whether it's boundaries or a workout or eating healthier, whatever we're trying to accomplish, maybe it's something in our business or our relationship, right? How do we know when we're ready for like the next step of the ladder?
I think when it's you start experiencing enough ease in those areas. So maybe not necessarily every day. I think asking yourself, how do I want to move my body? What does my body want to be fueled with today? Those kinds of things
Mhm.
help us get more into our bodies. Our bodies hold so much wisdom. We're often up in our heads or even out of our bodies, completely dissociated, walking through life. So just asking those questions can really help us tune in. I like to choose different categories. So we're kind of talking before we start recording, like different areas that we're leaning into discomfort. There can be like a health and wellness category, a finance category, a
Mhm.
relationship category, like you mentioned. Pick a category and then find that lowest rung and then see how long it takes. Check in every couple weeks, once a month, maybe. Um,
Mhm.
and just see where you're at and when you feel ready to move to the next rung, and then consider what are those tools and strategies, what skills do I need to develop in order to accomplish the next rung.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to bring something else in, like, oh, I need to this tool of this book, I need to read this
Mhm.
book on boundary setting,
Yeah.
so that because that's an area I want to level up at work and at home. Okay.
Mhm.
Or listen to some podcasts. I want to, consider check in with my body a bit more because that's where we know what our boundaries are or aren't. Like we need to check in with our bodies. So we want to get clear in some categories, but again, not too many at the same time.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And I think you know, slow is good for our nervous system as well, right? And like, I think it does get easier over time. Why do you think, though, that so many of us resist change? Because you've worked with a lot of people at this point.
Yeah.
So, what do you see? Maybe is there like a pattern that you see, or something you see a lot of why people are resisting change?
I think we often tell ourselves those stories. It's a way of saying, I can't do it. Not that I don't necessarily want it. We experience change all the time,
Mm-hmm.
all the time. I think it's just that people feel unskilled. I think a lot of the discomfort we experience in life is due to a lack of social emotional fluency or skill.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe, and I open my book with this, that we can deeply love and care for somebody or something, and actually have no idea how to be in relationship with them in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
So I know certain people in my life really love me, but are we estranged or maybe have a lot of distance in the relationship? Yeah, because they don't have the skill to be in healthy relationship. And so we do a lot of that discomfort that we experience is a lack of skill that we can build. Anybody can. It's just meet yourself where you are and then build from there by leaning into that discomfort. But it's a beautiful, beautiful journey to become more skilled and get to know yourself better. And that self trust that develops by leaning into discomfort, getting to know yourself in really cool ways,
Mm-hmm.
is, I just think it's what life is about.
Yeah.
Just,
I'm curious what you think about, like, let's say somebody has done a lot of work on themselves,
mhm.
and they have a partner and they feel a lot of disconnection with, and they're really wanting to connect better with their partner. How do we, without telling them, right? You need to go learn these skills. How do we create almost like a safe space like you really do with your clients, so that they can kind of embrace their own journey? Like, is there something you would say? Is there something you would do? What would that look like? And maybe this applies to like when you started this work with your son that you adopted, right? Like, how do you approach this idea with another person?
Well, I think the first place is always to start with yourself. A lot can shift in a relationship by just paying attention to your own skill set.
Mhm.
Um, and then depending, I mean, if it's your role as a parent, we model and we teach.
Mhm.
So we talk out loud. We say, "Oh, I learned this thing. This might be helpful." We're just kind of talking, "Oh, I feel this. This is how I'm going to manage it. Feel like I need to go on a walk. I had a really stressful day." You're
Mhm.
saying things out loud so they can hear you, and because they're always watching. And when it comes to partnered relationships in particular, one, it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I do see female identifying clients only. And so there's often this kind of, there can be maybe a skills gap. I wouldn't say better or worse. It's just there can end up being a skills gap. And clients are experiencing so much healing and growth that feels so good
Mhm.
that you want people to get on that bandwagon. It's like, this, come over here. This is really cool to
Mhm.
experience. I think in particular in, like, cis relationships, there's a lot of socialization where men are, they're socialized to not pay attention to building this skill set.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of ground that we've gained in that area. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, and every other article, maybe it's partly who I follow also, but every other article around HR, like hacking
Yeah.
HR networks and emotional intelligence, they're all talking about this kind of work, these kinds of skills in the workplace. You're more likely to achieve promotion. You're more likely to, have reduced interpersonal conflict and all kinds of benefits. So I think it is showing up in spaces that more men relate to,
Mhm.
that need for building the skill set. But a lot of it is just some modeling and
Yeah.
just like, hey, what works for me instead of you should.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
notice when I'm really stressed, it feels really good to have a list of things that I can lean into.
Mhm.
And then there's also boundaries. Hey,
Mhm.
it's not okay when you're dysregulated, when you're upset, to talk that way. That doesn't feel good. So I'm going to, we can chat, we can reconnect when you're more calm. That's
Mhm.
also okay to just,
Yeah.
this is happening a lot. Not my
Yeah, and
favorite.
I feel like, I talk a lot about, like, attachment styles and, a lot of times there's, like, the avoidant one marries the
Yep.
anxious one, right? Like, that's the
That's the
most
most
common in
common, right,
relationships,
the most
which
common.
is, like, just produces a crazy cycle, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
one wants to avoid and the other one is anxious and wants to pursue. And so, at least for my husband and I am more the avoidant actually, and he's more the anxious, and so when we do say hey, like this isn't working for us. I'm going to need a break. Let's talk about this in 20 minutes after we
yes,
cool off. So
yeah,
like is he has a if he has a time like, oh, she's going to come back and it's going to be at this time, it helps his anxiety know
yes,
that like I'm not abandoning him, which obviously comes from his own trauma.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm not abandoning, I'm gonna come back, right? Instead of triggering each other like back and forth. I see that a lot.
and I think there's a lot of actually power too in that dynamic, of anxious avoidant. I'm actually
Mhm.
ambivalent, and my husband's avoidant, and
Okay.
so I'm both anxious and
Mhm.
avoidant.
Yeah,
You never
yeah,
know what you're gonna get.
yeah.
Depends on what gets triggered. Um, but I think the beauty of that is that there's a lot of possibility for healing for both of you to
Mhm,
a more secure attachment. So one thing to note about that is that we're not always operating from insecure attachment, from that
mhm,
anxious avoidant. We get
mhm.
triggered into those spaces. So when we heal the trigger, pay attention to the trigger, there's a lot that can shift. And so I love the timestamp on it. I highly encourage clients to do. We don't just
Mhm,
like, no, I'm not talking about this right now, and we walk away. We're like, I'm going to take care of myself.
mhm.
And then we trust each other to do that. Hopefully, we at least have the skills to just manage our nervous systems and know what we need to calm down. And I'm going to come back in 20 minutes. Or I might need to just go to sleep tonight because I'm really tired and I might
Mhm.
do things. So we're going to talk tomorrow.
Yeah,
And then both of you have to manage your nervous systems around that. But it's really important to honor requests that
yeah.
way and not try and force each other to talk when either or both of you are dysregulated in any way.
And I
Yeah.
do the same thing with my kids. I'm like, "You know what? Mommy actually needs a timeout. So I'm gonna take 5 minutes and I'll be back."
Yeah.
I put
Absolutely.
myself on timeout.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I just need to we just need to
A break.
breathe here, you
Yeah.
know?
You just take a break.
It's okay.
It is. It is because they know you're going to come back. That's the important piece. And sometimes with certain kiddos, that would work. For my biological kiddos, I couldn't take a break. They're
Mm,
talking about, I need you to stay in the room and regulate that way.
mhm,
Sometimes, given certain attachment styles, we do need to stay in proximity, but we
mm,
can still take a break. And one of the best ways we can take a break, two ways: deep breathing.
mhm,
We always have our lungs with us. We can do that anytime.
mhm,
And a lot of us are breath holders, right? We're
mhm,
just like moving through the day, holding our breath. And that's really soothing to the nervous system to actually breathe. And then helpful self talk.
mm.
Like, I'm taking deep breaths. I can calm down. Okay. Feeling better already, right? You're just like in your mind or out loud. That helpful self talk goes a long way to soothing the nervous system.
Mhm. Love that.
Um, so, anytime, anywhere, those are great strategies to have on what I call a feel good plan or bliss list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love to talk a little bit about, I love talking about resilience, and I talk about it from a perspective of energy,
Mm,
like how much capacity we have to, prepare for, adapt to, or recover from adversity or something going on in our lives at the moment.
yeah.
So, how does leaning into discomfort actually help us be able to build our resilience? And what advice would you give to someone um, that knows they need to like increase their
Mhm.
capacity in this
Mhm.
area?
Resilience is an interesting conversation because a lot of times we conflate resilience with bootstrapping and being a tough cookie.
Yep. And
Right? Like,
that's why I
wow,
love talking about this.
yeah, wow, look at you, all these things. You must be so resilient. When in
Hmm.
reality, we know that people who've experienced toxic stress and trauma actually have a very small window of tolerance, we call it. Their
Hmm.
nervous system has actually very little capacity to
Yep.
navigate life stressors. And so we're often operating outside of that window of tolerance. And that's where, we're dysregulated, either super anxious and flying off the handle or very depressed and low energy. So it's really important that leading into discomfort piece, that's when we choose to, okay, I'm going to widen that window. I'm
Hmm.
going to widen that window of tolerance and build my resilience by leaning into these strategies. So
Hmm.
resilience can be improved by just, there's a lot of factors.
Hmm.
Um, but humor, being active, giving back to community, participating and being a helper. There's so many different ways. You can find all kinds of lists online of how to build resilience, but really know that it is not about bootstrapping.
Yeah.
That's not what this is. This is about being knocked flat and having the tools and strategies, support systems to be able to like get back on your feet and have more tools and strategies in the future. Like, you learned
Hmm.
something, you gained something from the experience
Yes.
versus just
Yes.
like constantly flat, constantly flat.
Yeah, I love that, and thank you for that because I love talking about it because I think I always ask, like, in an audience or something, like, "Give me words that you think, you think of when you hear the word resilient," and a lot of times people will say, strong,
Tough.
push through,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Mm-mm."
No, I think
So I
that's
love
part.
that just building that awareness of like, because it's a word that we hear a lot, I feel like now, like it's a common word that we hear and it's in a lot of things. And it's like, oh wow, you're so resilient because you went through all that trauma and you're still standing, and I'm like, okay, but like, did you come up with the tools and how do you feel?
Yeah.
Like,
I also think it's not a story someone can put on us. I
no,
think that's where we want to get really curious.
yeah.
Like, if someone's saying you are so resilient, you must be so resilient. In a lot of ways, the things that we say that way are about their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of like, oh, I could never. You must be so tough. I could never handle that. I think resilient is a word that we get to choose for ourselves.
Yeah,
I
I think
choose.
so
I
too.
say that I'm resilient.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear someone else's story about my experience,
Yeah.
because trauma and stress are relative, for one. And
Mm-hmm.
two, I want to choose my narrative around my life experience. I don't want somebody else's. That's one of the areas that I've had to do a lot of healing and growing around from my early childhood traumas. Like, you're a tough cookie. Look at all these things you
Mhm.
navigated.
Yep.
And I realized I didn't want to be tough that way.
Mhm.
I needed to be cared for, and it was more convenient for my caregivers to think that I'm tough and that I can handle it than it was for me to just be a kid.
Yeah, I can totally relate. Well,
So,
you have undergone a lot of personal transformation. What are some daily practices or maybe just
mm,
regular practices that help you continue to embrace discomfort and grow from it?
yeah. Um, Definitely movement is huge for me.
Okay.
So I have some type of movement in most of my days, even if it's just happens to be a 10-minute walk on my walking pad
Mhm.
while I'm
Mhm.
answering emails, that sort of thing. I do prefer slower mornings,
Mhm.
also, and so I don't necessarily sleep in per se, but I do like a lot of time in my morning.
Mhm. I'm so the same.
Yeah, so I just bake that into I actually just recently got diagnosed with ADHD. I'm 46 and just had a diagnosis with it. And so I'm learning that's also part of being neurodivergent is really wanting like a slow start to your day.
Oh, interesting.
Well, part
Okay.
of it is just like crafting my environment. I
Mhm.
pay a lot of attention to making sure that my environment facilitates my well-being
Mm.
and to not like clutter, like
Mhm.
keep things simple and have certain routines, but also I can be flexible if that morning I have an early networking meeting or whatever it is. But movement is huge. I do like time and self-reflection.
Mhm.
I'm a thinker. I like to write a few things out, that sort of thing. Friends are huge.
Mm.
I recently moved to a new state, so I have friends here. I also have friends all over the country and the world, really. And so Marco Polo is huge.
Mhm.
It's an app that I really love to just connect with people. So ways to connect with my social support system. And then my husband and I are recently empty nesters, so we're
Mm.
discovering some different ways that kind of feed our relationship in a in just a really different way. It's kind of a wild and wonky world
I
now.
love that.
So, yeah, or just little things you're like, "Oh, we'd like to do that together. We actually have time to do something together." Okay.
Weird.
Yeah, it's so odd that we're not just running kids all over the place anymore. It's a different experience. So, movement, I would say, is number 1. Definitely time and self-reflection and pause
Mm. Mhm.
for and some slow living, honestly. Just some nice slow living here and there.
Yeah, we all
Yeah.
need that with all the rushed energy in this world.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us about how people can connect with you, find you. Is there any projects or anything coming up that you want to share with us?
I'm just expanding my work into kind of the corporate space. I did a lot of
Mhm.
consulting around trauma-informed practices and
Mhm.
essentially owning discomfort in the educational space. That's part of my
Yeah.
background, as a school counselor and social worker. And I'm expanding into corporate and organizational spaces. So I'd love to speak
Yeah.
to teams and organizations around how to create safer spaces for individuals and on an organizational level.
Mhm.
You can find me through my book, Could It Be Better? It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I also have a podcast. It's called Make Discomfort Your Bitch. I
Oh, I
don't know
love
if
it.
I can edit that out.
I love it.
But you can find me there as well. And then just through my website, shareanderton.com, and on social at Cher Anderton.
Awesome. Well, I will have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your heart and all your insights with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jillian.
Yeah, it's been so fun. I know our listeners are just going to walk away with so many more practical tips. And also, I feel like just feel seen, because it's like we all deal with challenges. We all have discomforts, like nobody is immune to those. And, those discomforts might look different, but like building the tools and knowing that other people have felt those discomforts and that they've sought out the tools and nowadays, like we talked about, like you can go on podcasts, you can read books, like there's so much information out in the world, like, so if you feel like there's something missing, like dive into that, ask yourselves the questions that me and Cher were just talking about with you on here, own it.
Yep. On that
And,
discomfort.
embrace the discomfort and, find the tools. So connect with Cher, follow us on Instagram and, I hope this episode has inspired you to rethink how you approach discomfort in your own life. So remember, the growth we seek often lies just beyond our comfort zones. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to check out Cher's work and continue the journey towards embracing discomfort as a superpower. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more episodes of Life Without Secrets. Hey there, it's Jillian from Life Without Secrets. Ever feel like you and your partner aren't quite on the same page? Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I created our latest issue of Truthful magazine. It's packed with insights and stories about bridging that gap and finding a deeper connection. We're diving into real conversations about needs, feelings, and how honest dialogue can rekindle that closeness that you've been missing. Why not explore this together? Go grab your free copy right now at lifewithoutsecrets.com and turn those pages into shared moments. Can't wait for you to dive in and share your thoughts with me.